Guys, welcome after a break. I apologize. I had vertigo. It's still not completely sorted out, but I really do appreciate the fact that we're all getting back together. I wanted to dedicate this year to the La'elu Neshamas of Pesa bas Dov, who is Gary Rothstein's late mother. And she passed away on the 10th of Teves a few years ago, but often we take December and January as a break, so we never did get it together to give a share for an aliyah for her neshama. But I wish Gary long life, and I think it's very appropriate that for such a special person that her basically Yotzat was on the 10th of Teves when there's a fast. And just before we get started with the Mishnah and Gemara, and that's one of the reasons I chose today as a dedication, because Mishnah and Neshama have got the same Hebrew letters, so there's obviously an idea when you go to many Shiva houses to have both of them coincide. So Kevin, just before I give the Gemara share, do you want to share an idea for a minute or two before we get started? Because we just have it pressed for time.
Yes, quick one. So this is advice for all of us, uh, myself included. So when you're in shul and when people say Kaddish, and one must try answer Amen and say it loudly. And for some people don't answer, and it helps the neshama of the person whose Kaddish is being said for to answer Amen. Just say it audibly. I try to do that. I've done that now for a while. I mean, I try, unless I'm late or something, or in the middle of something, of saying something. I try to say it to answer Amen to all the Kaddishes and not, because some people, like they said, like you don't hear it. It's got to be audible when we respond to someone saying Kaddish or like even like Baruch Hu, everything. And in Kedusha, uh, we need to project our voices. We don't have to shout and scream, but as long as it's heard, and especially sometimes you get people standing next to you saying Kaddish, and people like you don't even hear a response. You don't even hear people or they'll mumble it. Instead, it's got to be spoken and projected. It's got to be heard. That's what I wanted to say because it's actually a mitzvah also to answer amen. It's a very good thing. I heard I can't give a source, but it's a very good thing to answer amen to Kaddish and to brachot and amen Yahshua Rabbah for the second line of Kaddish. And just also in when people repeat the Shemona Esrei to answer amen to every bracha that the Chazan is repeating.
Good point. I must be honest with you. Before I lost my mom many years ago, I wasn't that considerate of responding to Kaddish. And I think as you go through life and you have a lot more empathy as you join those sort of clubs. It's a club no one wants to join, but once you join, you have a lot of empathy for those that have lost people they love. And it gives you a sensitivity to respond to the Kaddish to elevate both that person's neshama as well as glorify Hashem's name. So on that, let's start the Mishnah, and I'm just going to read it. I generally let you guys read it, but um, just I wanted to emphasize certain aspects of it. So if we in Makkos in 4a in of 4a3 specifically in the article Schottenstein for your reference. And please know this discussion has been repeated in Ketubos or Kesubos 32a and 32b. So sometimes in the Gemara, we saw this with Bava Kama. There were certain discussions that reoccurred in Kedushin and various other frameworks although they were repeated, the context was slightly different. So we learn by getting more of a 3D approach. So on Makkos, two witnesses said, "We testify about this man that he owes his fellow 200 zuz." And they were found to be zomimim, which are conspiring witnesses. They received lashes for their false testimony, and they paid their victim what they intended to make him lose. Because the scriptural verse that makes them liable to lashes is not the one that makes them liable to payment. The biblical verse that mandates the penalty of lashes for false testimony is not the same as the one which dictates the reciprocal punishment of zomimim, plotting or conspiring witnesses. Since the two penalties derive from two different verses, both must be carried out. These are the words of Rabbi Meir. But the sages say whoever pays does not receive lashes. A person cannot be liable to both lashes and monetary payment for violating the same prohibition. Obviously, we'll go through it in the Gemara. So we're learning a similar case now, but you'll see the difference. If they said, "We testify about this man that is liable to 40 lashes for transgressing any of the biblical prohibitions that are subject to this punishment," and they were found to be conspiring witnesses, zomimim, they receive 80 lashes. In other words, they each receive two sets of 40 lashes. Why? One set for violating the prohibition, "You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor," which is in Shmot chapter 20, verse 13. And the second for the biblical directive, "And you shall do to him as he planned to do to his brother," which is in Devarim, Deuteronomy chapter 19, verse 19. So the general hazama penalty is different from the ninth commandment, "You shall not bear false witness." These are the words of Rabbi Meir. But the sages say they only receive 40 lashes each as their hazama penalty, but nothing for transgressing the prohibition against false testimony. Okay. So they sound like a similar case, but we are going to see some notable differences going forward. Now, I just obviously wanted to share one or two points with you. You can just give me a second. So, before I start the Gemara, I actually want to share a pasuk with you that's going to be a little bit helpful in this regard. You can just bear with me a second. Okay. If you can see in Devarim, Deuteronomy chapter 25, verse 2, you've got this term, "If the guilty one is to be flogged, the magistrate shall have the person lie down and shall supervise the giving of lashes by count, as warranted by the offense." Now, I want to bring your attention to this word, rishato. Can you guys see this word rishato? Anybody can't see it?
Can see it.
So Rasha.
Correct. But I want to bring your attention to the fact that this word wickedness is actually in the singular. So if the Gemara looks to understand the reasoning of the disputants, it's looking at the view first of the rabbis. And what it's trying to say is that the witnesses do not pay the reciprocal penalty and receive lashes as well. And it's understandable because if you look at this particular verse, it says in accordance with his wickedness, which teaches, when you look at the actual word, that when it looks at Malchus, that you can only be liable for one punishment, because this limitation is a general rule that bars the conjunction of Malchus and Manuti penalties. Okay? So in other words, the way the rabbis hold is you can't have lashes and monetary penalties. This whole argument, you must look in Kesubos 32a. But basically, the basis for applying the monetary punishment to Zomimim witnesses rather than Malchus is laid out there as in this Gemara, but a similar principle is derived from another source, which basically precludes a person receiving the dual penalties of execution and payment, and execution and lashes. I mean, we studied this in Sanhedrin, which appears in Kesubos 37, the 37th daf, which you've got a principle of kimle b'di rabba minne, which means you only pay the greater penalty. If there are two death penalties, they obviously do the more stringent one if to cover both executable offenses. And the same thing is that if you break Shabbos with the right warning, which is a death penalty offense, by lighting a Picasso with the same simultaneous act in terms of time span. In other words, when you light it, you break Shabbos, and you've just cost $20 million for the Picasso, you wouldn't have to have the monetary payment because the death penalty takes in compensation both the higher and lower penalty. But we're dealing with a different case here because receiving more than one set of lashes is not executed by the principal because they're the same type of punishment. In other words, the first part of the Mishnah dealt with the case of Malkus, and then it dealt with the monetary payment. And it said if you pay money, you don't then have to assign lashes. But as far as we're concerned, the rabbis are also holding the same, that if there are two sets of lashes, one for the transgressing of bearing false witness and the other one for the reciprocal hazama penalty, you only pay it once. But the principle of why I was showing you the verse is that we teach that because it's in the singular, you can only hold him liable for one wickedness, but you cannot hold him liable for two wickednesses. In other words, you can't give one of the Eidim Zomamim or each Eidim Zomamim two different penalties for one deed. In terms of Rabbi Meir's reasoning for mandating two punishments for that single deed, we've got to look at it now. In other words, why doesn't he accept that spiritual scriptural verse of the singular of the word wickedness? Okay. So, does everybody see where the rabbis say that there's only a single punishment by looking at the pasuk because of the singular of the word wickedness? So now we're going to just look at Rabbi Meir. If you just give me a second. So, Rabbi Meir actually derives it from a different verse. And I'm going to just share that verse if you give me 1 second on the screen, and I'm showing you. Give me 1 second. Now, if you look at Devarim Deuteronomy chapter 22, it goes basically from verse number 13 all the way to 19. And what it talks about is a Nara who's living under her father's house that has only dealt with the betrothal aspect to her husband. In other words, Irusin. And what is a Nara? It's actually a girl in the first 6 months of puberty. So she got married early. She left her father's house. And the husband defames her because he's taken a disliking to her, and he's fraudulently trying to prove in court that she was unfaithful during her betrothal period, the Irusin. Okay, and that's in Kesubos 46a. And what happens there is we learn a proof from Ulla that the Torah decrees that he be fined 100 silver shekels, which goes to the girl's father, and he is lashed as a punishment. So what does that imply? According to Rabbi Meir, there are two punishments. There's a monetary payment and lashes. So obviously Rabbi Meir derives the source from Ulla, from one who defames his wife, just as one who defames his wife receives lashes and pays. Since the Torah explicitly decrees both punishments goes for this offense, so to anyone who commits an act that carries penalties of both lashes and a monetary payment receives lashes and pays. So how do we derive this? So as far as Rabbi Meir is concerned, the pasuk against bearing false witness is the prohibition of a negative commandment, which gets lashes, and the payment is that the Edim Zomamim sought to cost the victim in the defendant another 200 zuz. So what we learned before is lashes are not separated. In other words, they don't. If you had 3 false witnesses, we know it's not 40 lashes. It's actually 39. They don't get 13 lashes each. Each person gets the lashes they intended to cause to the other, meaning they don't share it. But as far as payment is concerned, because it's compensatory in nature in the sense that this is what they sought to cost him, they take the total amount and divide it by the number of Edim Zomamim. So in this case, the 2 Edim Zomamim each would pay 100 zuz, and each would get the full set of lashes. Now, I just want to share one other thing with you. If you can see, I don't know, guys, can you see the screen on Kesubot 32a?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So that's the source where it goes through Makkos, and it's a repetition of the arguments with both of them. Okay, so we learned that Rabbi Meir uses Ula. The reason why I'm showing you all these sources is that I'm hoping that when you've got, in terms of where I'm quoting, it's going to make it a little bit clearer. So the Gemara's got a bit of a problem with Rabbi Meir using Ula, because it says, what comparison can be made to the defamer, which is a fan, and it can therefore not serve as a model for Zomamim. So what did we learn once before? Anybody wants to take a guess with regards to fan? Guys that did Bava Kama. This isn't Lance's issue. Do you remember?
Just so to find, to a fine or to funds. Is that what the question is?
So, whether it's a kanas, which is a fan, or multiple fans, the principle that we actually learn is that generally you can't extrapolate a case where there's a fan to another monetary case, because a fan is known as a chiddush. Often it's a deterrent. It's a punitive measure. And therefore, it's very difficult to learn a case of fines to another case, particularly because you can't derive a principle. In other words, if you have to give 100 silver pieces to the girl's father, the Naira's father, and have him have 39 lashes, then in another case, how many silver coins do you give? It's different when somebody reverses into your car and has cost you 20,000 Rand. And in another case, when they reverse in your car, they've only cost you 6,000 Rand, because you say what you intended to damage, so too you shall pay. In other words, you can learn a principle from Mammon, Kevin, but you can't learn it necessarily. Mammon is compensation from a knas, a penalty. So the Gemara's problem is, how do we learn a principle that can be applied to other cases from a knas, which is a penalty, which is punitive? That's the Gemara's problem. Because it can't generally serve as a model for laws which don't share that novelty, because it's meant as a deterrent factor. And generally with the fine, you will recognize it because it's a set amount. It doesn't share the cost of the damage. It often can be waived if a person confesses. So if you steal a ox and slaughter it, then if you admit it by your own volition, you only have to replace the ox. Otherwise, you have to have a fivefold payment. Obviously, one of those payments is compensatory in nature, and the penalty is 4 times the principal amount. And for a sheep, it's 3 times the principal amount. So by admitting it and not troubling the court with witnesses and judges, in that case, you wouldn't have to have that stringency. And a normal theft, he shall pay double, which is the principal compensatory amount of the theft, as well as a penalty equal to the compensatory amount. So therefore, because a knas generally has a novelty, we don't generally learn a knas. So that's the first problem that's coming up, is that The Gemara says you can't use this comparison with the defamer, which is a fine, because it can't generally serve as a model for other payment cases. So the answer that the Gemara gives is it says that Rabbi Meir holds the same as Rabbi Akiva. Now, if you remember in the second daf, Rabbi Akiva said that the punishment imposed on Zomimim witnesses is also a fine. And therefore, if you're taking a case with the defamer, which is a fine, and you're holding a similar principle to another case, which is a fine and not compensatory in nature, you can learn that principle specifically because it is about testimony. And so too, Adam Zomimim is about testimony. So you're learning testimony cases at which a fine is promulgated in both as a punishment. And it's comparable to a case of one who defames his wife. So if I can just refresh your memory, the reason why Rabbi Akiva says that Adam Zomimim for conspiring witnesses pay a fine and not compensation is he said it is a fine for the simple reason is that once the verdict is given, but the verdict is not carried out because a second set of witnesses testify against the first set that they couldn't have been there to witness the crime simply because they were with the second set of witnesses in a different location, and therefore they couldn't have witnessed the event. What's coming into integrity question here is not the matters of the case. When there's a legal case and you've got witnesses that might have viewed the case and are giving contradictory details between first and second set of witnesses, there's no reciprocal punishment because the case is thrown out of court. We don't believe the second set of witnesses any more than the first case set of witnesses because there's a contradiction in testimony. But here we do believe the second set of witnesses because this comes down from Moshe at Hasinai, because the first set of witnesses, their character is being brought into question because they weren't there at the location they said they were at to testify against that event, because the second set has placed them elsewhere with them in a different province, for example, and therefore the integrity has come into question, and therefore they get the reciprocal penalty only if A, the sentence has not been carried out, but also if the verdict has been given. Now, the reason why Rabbi Akiva sees it as a fine is they haven't yet cost, for example, the defendant the 200 zuz, because after the verdict came about, the second set of witnesses appeared and said the first set were not at Santon when he stole the money, because the first set of witnesses were on holiday with them in Plettenberg Bay. And therefore what they sought to do to this person is done to them, but it hasn't yet cost the victim money. So therefore, if it hasn't cost them money, it's not compensatory in nature. They're giving it over to the victim, not the court, as a penalty for their conspiring testimony. Now, since Rabbi Meir holds the same as Rabbi Akiva, that they're both kanas, they're both penalties, and they both regard false testimony, then in that particular case, you can learn the one case from the other. And therefore, that would answer the Gemara's question. What do the rabbis see it as a mammon, compensatory in nature? Because the rabbis hold that we place everything on the verdict. What do we mean we place everything on the verdict? Is that, Arthur, are you there? I know Kevin stood up. He's a bit tired. Are you? Okay, I'm happy. I check everybody. So the reason why the rabbis see it as mammon, which is compensation, is the minute the verdict is given. Okay, in secular law, when it says we pronounce somebody guilty, they often take other things into consideration to see how long the sentence is and what the sentence is. Is there premeditation? Is it the first-time offense? Is it a felony offense? Different state jurisdictions in the US have got different federal laws. So sentencing and a verdict are not the same process, but in Talmudic law, it is the same process. And at the point where you sentenced, with the verdict, that's where you would technically have to pay. It's not a separate process. So the rabbis say, in technicality, although the person doesn't end up paying because by the skin of his nose, the second set of witnesses discredited the first set by saying they weren't at that location, it's as if he did pay because it's the same legal process. It's at the sentencing stage and the verdict stage, which is the same. And therefore, since they sought to cost this victim 200 zuz, they in fact would pay 200 zuz. So they see it as compensatory in nature, whereas Rabbi Akiva said, I don't care if a verdict's been given. It's not compensatory because he hadn't had to pay the 200 zuz yet. Do you see the difference, guys? Okay. So now that we've dealt with that issue, let's just go on in the Gemara. We're taking our time here because we want to just make sure that everything makes sense. So that's the first statement of Ula backing up Rabbi Meir. There is a second statement. I'm just going to share my screen. If you give me 1 second. Okay. Okay. Now, if you have a look in Shmot, Exodus chapter 12, verse 10, you shall not leave over any of it until morning. If any of it is left till morning, you shall burn it. So what is this actually talking about? The second version of Rav Ula's statement doesn't talk about the defamer of a nara, of a wife, and questioning her virginity. It's actually say that Ula's statement taught the pasuk from the so in other words, there's a brisa, and that brisa quotes this pasuk in Shmot chapter 12, verse 10. And it basically concerns the consumption of the Pesach offering, the Passover offering. And it says, you shall not leave over any of it until morning, and that which is left until morning, you shall burn in fire. So the Chumash comes to provide a positive commandment to burn any leftover to follow the prohibition of leaving over. And to say that one doesn't receive lashes for it, in other words, why should you receive lashes? Because if you violate the transgression of leaving over sacrificial meat, it would generally, there's a general principle. In other words, any prohibition for which the Torah decrees a positive commandment as a means of rectifying the transgression isn't subject to the penalty of lashes. So what we are saying is here, the whole reason that it gives in Exodus this case that you got to burn the Pesach offering the next morning is it wants to remedy that negative commandment by offering a positive way to deal with the transgression of leaving over the offering. So there's a classical example of this. If somebody steals somebody's property, why are there no lashes for theft? Because how do you rectify the sins of theft, guys? How do you rectify it?
You return it or pay the money.
Exactly, you just return what you stole. So they're not lashes if you can positively remedy it. So that's obviously a proof that they're saying that, look, basically, the words of Rabbi Yehuda that says that you don't receive lashes for it because although you generally get lashed for transgressing a negative commandment, if there's a positive commandment to burn over the sacrificial leftovers, that would serve as a way to rectify so you don't need lashes. That's Rabbi Yehuda. And other opinions say that's not the reason why you don't receive lashes for leaving over part of the sacrifice. What's the second reason? And this is very, very pertinent to what we're doing. Rather, it's a prohibition that involves no action. Because what? The transgression, guys, didn't result from an act. It's actually a failure to act. What's the failure to act? The failure to eat the entire sacrifice within the proper time. And if you fail to act, you don't receive lashes for transgressions that involve no action. Okay, and we went through this before, that in Teruma and Shavuos, etc., we learn that some people hold that for bearing false witness, there's no punishment of malchus, of lashes, because there's no action. And some say that even though there's no actions, because you violate a negative commandment, using Ulla's example, it does get lashes. And it brings this case in Sanhedrin, because you must know that blasphemy is not an action, it's speech. And yet it gets a death penalty offense. So as far as Rabbi Meir is concerned, is that if you look at the implication of the brisa, it can be inferred that Rabbi Yehuda, who requires the additional positive commandment to remove the penalty of lashes, holds that a person actually does receive lashes for a prohibition that involves no action. And if it were not for the additional positive commandment of burning it, you wouldn't be able to remedy it, and therefore you would receive lashes for leaving over the offering meat, which is a failure to act. And from where do we know this? So, some understood Ulla's point to be from the defamer. So if you look at it and you put the two in conjunction, just as defaming is a prohibition whose transgression involves no action. Okay? It's merely defamatory speech. It's not legally considered an action, and you receive lashes for it. This is proof, according to Ulla, that you receive lashes for any prohibition that does not involve an action, such as the laws of Adem Zomamim, where there's the Hazamat penalty. What did we learn? We learned in a case where you cannot apply the reciprocal penalty, the default position is what, guys? Is what? What can you, if you can't give the reciprocal penalty of what you intended to do to your victim, as the Adem Zomamim?
Lashes.
Lashes, exactly, Gavin. We learned this. We
So
learned
it wasn't
that,
I'm back into concentrate. Sorry.
a Cohen doesn't lose his Kohanis status. He's not stripped of it because it would affect his children, and therefore his children haven't done anything wrong. He receives lashes. So the Gemara doesn't agree with Ulla's analogy, because it says, look, how can you compare this to a case of a defamer who receives lashes and must also pay? Because it's indicating that with the case of a defamer, it's a law of unusual severity, and it can't serve as a model for less stringent laws. So we're going to go through this whole thing backwards and forwards of what's considered the common characteristic and more stringencies versus less stringencies. We've got about 4 minutes left. Guys, can you give me another 4 minutes to cover ground, or are you tired? It's your call, guys.
No, might as well go for it. You
Okay.
can have 3 minutes and 59 seconds, actually.
All right. So let's go through it. So as far as they're concerned, they're saying this case of a defamer has an unusual stringency. You pay 100 silver shekels to the girl's father, and the person gets the 39 lashes. So the Gemara offers this other explanation of the source for Rav Yehuda's opinion, that you receive lashes even for the prohibition that involves no action. So what the Gemara is saying is it's not quite happy with Ulla's explanation. It seems that the case of a defamer has an unusual penalty of both lashes and monetary payment, because the rabbis hold that in view of the fact that it's payment, you don't have to also give lashes, because it uses the singular wickedness when it refers to lashing, meaning there's no two punishments. So it says, well, you need another source. So Reish Lakish said he derives it from the laws of Zomamim witnesses, because just as Adem Zomamim receive lashes for violating a prohibition which does not involve an action, merely conspiring speech or defamatory speech, so too a person receives lashes for any prohibition that does not involve an action. And we learn this, that when you can't apply the reciprocal penalty for whatever reason, that lashes would be the appropriate action. So the Gemara says, look, it's still got a problem, because how can you make this comparison to Zomimim witnesses? Because if you contrast that to all others that receive lashes, Eidim Zomimim is one of the only cases that require no proper warning. In other words, when you're generally going to get corporal punishment, or you're going to get the death penalty, or anything else like that, the Siddur has to be warned in advance. Except in the case of Eidim Zomimim, it requires no prior warning. And that since there's a particular stringency regarding that, if you look in Pesa bas 33a, that it seems that this case of Eidim Zomimim is also got exceptional severity. This because a person gets lashed without performing an action, nor is he warned. And therefore, we are saying that the law of the defamer is going to prove that it's an added stringency, because there's both lashes and monetary payment. And if you look at Eidim Zomimim, they're lashes without warning. And then they're both stringent cases. So how can we learn a general case when there's no action involved, you get lashes? And just to summarize, we're going to go through it in more detail tomorrow. But basically, we look at what you call the common characteristic. Is yes, they both have a stringency. But if you look at the common characteristic, they both get lashed for defamatory speech that involves no action. And we can learn from not the severity of each case, but the common denominator in each case. We found this in Bavli, which is a principle known as Sada Shaveh, which is a case where you're learning, it's one of the pneumatical principles. It's where you take a general principle derived from two verses, you see the similarity in the case, and you can apply it to that particular case, even if it's a case of a fine, if they're both similar in nature as well as compensatory. So we say we take the common characteristic that although there's no action, there can still be lashes in both cases, and not look at the unique stringency of each. We're going to go through it in more detail tomorrow, guys.
Damon, so this defamer, he affects by making these allegations against a young woman who's been betrothed. Does it affect her financially, or just her reputation? That
she could get the
can there
death
be a
penalty.